You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 82. An old pedant tries to instill some moral philosophy into his incorrigible pupil. And the ailing naiad, in a nightmare, confronts the specters of her fevered mind. Bravo, cried grandmother Jia as Bao Yu came in from school. So they've finally broken in, my frisky colt. Come along now, your father will be expecting to see you, I'm sure. Then you must find something nice and relaxing to do. Yes, Granny. Bao Yu reported to the study. Back already? Said Jiaxing. Well, has the preceptor given you a scheme of work? Bao Yu rehearsed his timetable: pre-prandium, general revision, post-prandium, calligraphy, meridianum, exegesis, and reading of model compositions. Jiaxing nodded. Fair enough. Off you go now and keep your grandmother company for a little while. Let's see if you can turn over a new leaf and behave seriously from now on. No more of the old childish nonsense, eh? Go to bed on time, rise early, and attend your classes regularly. Understood? With a string of fluent yes sirs, Bao Yu backed smartly out of the study. He hurried over to see his mother, put in another brief appearance at grandmother Jia's, so brief that he hardly had time to turn around, then dashed off once more, impatient to reach the naiad's house. I'm back, he called from outside the doorway. The unexpectedness of his arrival, and the explosion of laughing and clapping that announced it, gave Dayu quite a turn. Nightingale drew aside the portiere, and he walked in and sat himself down. Does my memory fail me, said Dayu, or didn't I hear something to the effect that you were going to school today? Haven't you been let off rather early? Goodness, exclaimed Bao Yu. I can hardly believe it. Yes, father did banish me to that place, what an ordeal. I don't know how I stuck it out. I thought I'd never see you all again. But now, one glimpse of you has raised my spirit from the dead. How does the old song go? 'Twas scarce a day we were apart. It seemed 3 autumns long. That's just how I feel. Have you been to see grandmother and your parents? Asked Dayu. Yes, yes. And the others? Not yet. Shouldn't you go and see them now? But I don't feel like going anywhere. All I want to do is sit here and chat with you for a bit. Anyway, father says from now on it's early to bed and early to rise, so the others will have to wait until tomorrow. Very well then, said Dayu. A short stay. Then you must be sensible and go and lie down. But I'm not tired, protested Bao Yu. Just fed up with all that. It's doing me a world of good, in fact, being here with you, if you'd only stop thinking of all these things I should be doing. A faint smile crossed Dayu's face. Nightingale, would you make Master Bao a cup of dragon-well tea? We must see that scholarship is suitably rewarded. Nightingale smiled and went to fetch the tea, which she entrusted to one of the junior maids. Bao Yu reacted smartly. Scholarship. Why, you're almost beginning to sound like one of them. I can't abide all that hypocritical moralizing. And those absurd octopartite essays, which they have the nerve to call propagation of Holy Writ, are nothing more than a shoddy way of worming themselves into a job. The whole thing makes me sick. Not content with botching together a few classical tags, they try to hide the fact that they haven't got a single original idea of their own by churning out a lot of far-fetched purple passages, and then pride themselves on having been subtle and profound. Erg. Holy Writ. Holy pretentious humbug I'd call it. I know father is forcing that sort of thing down my throat at present, and I just have to grin and bear it, but that's no reason for you to go on about it the moment I'm back. I know girls don't have to read octopartites, replied Dayu. But when I was little, and was having lessons with your cousin Yucun, I looked at a few and remember thinking that some were quite well thought out and sensibly written. 1 or 2 were even quite subtle, and had a certain delicate charm. They were rather above my head at the time, but I still enjoyed reading them. It's silly to run them all down. Anyway, I think if you want to get on in life, this is quite an admirable way of doing it. Bao Yu could hardly believe his ears. What had come over Dai Yu? She had never preached worldly wisdom at him like this before. Not wishing to provoke a full-scale argument, however, he restricted himself to a little snort of amazement. Meanwhile, voices could be heard outside. Aroma sent me to her old ladyships to fetch Master Bao home from school. It was Ripple. I've tracked him down at last. Go on, replied Nightingale. Let him drink his tea first. It's just this minute been made. The two maids came in together, and Bao Yu laughed. I was just on my way, Ripple, you shouldn't have bothered to come. You'd best drink your tea and be off. Nightingale chimed in, before Ripple could get a word in. Can't you see how they've been pining for you all day? PSCHT. You mean little fibber, cried Ripple, rising perfectly to the bait. Everyone laughed. Bao Yu finally stood up to say goodbye, and Dai Yu saw him to the door. Nightingale stood at the foot of the steps till he was on his way, and then she too went back indoors. When Bao Yu arrived at Green Delights, Aroma emerged from the inner room to greet him. Finished school then? She asked. Oh, Master Bao's been back for ages, Ripple answered for him. He's been at Miss Lin's. Did anything happen while I was away? Asked Bao Yu. Oh, nothing much, replied Aroma pointedly. Just a lecture from Faithful. Her ladyship sent her to let us know that this time the master is in deadly earnest about your studies, and if any of us dares to play the fool with you again, will be dealt with like Skybright in chess. She sighed. We do our very best to serve you, and that's all the thanks we get. It's all so pointless. Her evident distress brought a swift reply from Bao Yu. My poor Aroma. You've no need to worry. So long as I work hard, none of you need ever hear another word from Mother. I'm going to do some work this evening, as the preceptor wants me to do some exposition tomorrow. If there's anything I need, Musk and Ripple can get it for me, so you go and have a rest. If only you would work hard, said Aroma, it would be a joy to serve you. Inspired by her words, Bao Yu bolted his supper, had his reading lamp lit, and sat down straight away to revise his basic texts, the 4 books of Confucian scripture. One glance at the first page, however, with its columns of heavily annotated text, and he began to experience a familiar sinking feeling. He tried flicking through one volume, and the general drift seemed clear enough, but the moment he went into it in any detail, it seemed to slip from his grasp. He turned for help to the marginal commentaries, he read the expository essays, keeping up the struggle till late in the evening. Poems are easy, he thought to himself. But I can't make head or tail of this stuff. He sat back, gazed at the ceiling, and was soon lost in a daydream. Bedtime, said Aroma firmly. You've done quite enough work for this evening. Bao Yu gave an inaudible reply. Musk and Aroma helped him into bed, and then went to sleep themselves. During the night, they woke to hear him tossing and turning on the Kong. Are you still awake? Said Aroma. You must stop fretting and have a good night's sleep. You can work hard again tomorrow. I know, replied Bao Yu. But I just can't get to sleep. Come and take off one of my covers. It's a cold night. You'd better keep it on. I feel so restless. He threw back the top cover himself. Aroma immediately clambered over to tuck it in again, and put her hand to his brow. It felt slightly feverish. Lie still, she said. You've a fever. I know. What's the matter? It's nothing. I'm just nervous, that's all. Please don't make a thing of it. If Father finds out, he's bound to say I'm cooking up an excuse to miss school. It would seem too much of a coincidence. I'll feel better in the morning, and once I'm at school it'll go away. Aroma gave in. I'll sleep here by your side, she said. She massaged his back a little, and in no time they were both fast asleep. When they woke next morning, the sun was already high in the sky. "Help!" cried Bao Yu. "I'm late." He quickly washed and combed his hair, completed his round of morning duties, and set off for school. The preceptor's severe expression as he walked into the schoolroom did not bode well. "Tardy, boy, tardy. What is the meaning of this? Small wonder that you have incurred your father's displeasure, and caused him to call you his prodigal son, if this is the way you think you can behave on your second day." Bao Yu told him of his fever the night before, then crossed over to his desk and sat down to his work. It was late in the afternoon when he was called forward. "Bao Yu, step up here. Oral exposition of this text." Bao Yu walked up. On inspection, he found to his relief that it was a rubric he knew. Analects, Chapter 9, Verse XXII, Maxima debetur puero reverentia, respect due to youth. What a stroke of luck, he thought to himself. Thank goodness it's not from the mag or the med. How do you wish me to begin, sir? Amplificatio totius, boy. Give the substance of the passage carefully in your own words. Bao Yu first recited the original chapter, in the prescribed sing-song intonation, and then began. In this verse we have the sage's exhortation to youth to seize the hour, and strive with zeal, lest they end up becoming. Bao Yu looked up at Dai Yu. The preceptor sensed what was coming and tried to conceal his embarrassment with a short laugh. Come on, boy, come on. What is holding you back? Are you afraid of using a non-licit expression up to books? Remember, scriptural exegesis is exempt from the normal rules of verbal prohibition. Liber rituum, Book I, in canonicorum classicorum librorum studiis nomenclationum cessit prohibitio. What may they end up becoming? Complete failures, sir, said Bao Yu, barely suppressing a mischievous smile. In the first segment, Sut Verendi, the sage is spurring youth on to moral endeavor in the present, while the last segment, Non sunt digni quos viriris, contains his caution for the future. He looked up again at Dai Yu. That will do. Interpretatio partium. Bao Yu began again. Confucius saith, for the duration of youth, each spiritual and mental talent must be held in due esteem. For how can we ever predict with certainty another's ultimate station in life? But if a man, by drifting and wasting his days, should reach the age of 40 or 50 and still be unsuccessful and obscure, then it can fairly be said that his youthful promise was an empty one. He will have forfeited forever the esteem of his fellow men. Your amplificatio totius was passably clear, commented Dai Yu with a dry smile. But I am afraid your interpretatio partium showed a good deal of immaturity. In the phrase sine nomine, nomen refers not to success in the worldly sense, but rather to an individual's achievement in the moral and intellectual spheres. In this sense it by no means implies official rank. On the contrary, many of the great sages of antiquity were obscure figures who withdrew from the world, and yet we hold them in the highest esteem, do we not? Non sunt digni quos virimer? You construe the last sentence incorrectly, he droned on. Here it is not the element of esteem, but the irreconcilable nature of the judgment of his fellow men that is being contrasted with their tentative appraisal of him as a youth, see second sentence of your text. This emphasis is central to a correct elucidation of the passage. Do you follow me? Yes, sir. Good. Here is another. Dai Yu turned back a few pages and pointed out a passage to Bao Yu. It was Analects again, this time chapter 9, verse 18, Ego non dum vidica amet virtutum sicut amat pulchrum specium, the rarity of a sincere love of virtue. Bao Yu scented danger ahead, and said with his most ingenuous smile. I'm afraid I can't think of anything to say, sir. Nonsense, my boy. Is that what you would write if it turned up as a thema in your paper? Reluctantly Bao Yu set the wheels in motion. Confucius saith, men will not love virtue, and yet they fall down and worship sensual beauty at first sight. The reason for this disaffection is that they are blind to the intrinsicality of virtue. Beauty is an intrinsic quality too, and is such loved by all, but it belongs to the realm of human desire, whereas virtue is a natural principle. How can principle hope to compete with desire for the affections of men? Confucius is both lamenting the state of the world and hoping for a change of heart. The love of virtue he has observed has been for the most part a shallow and short-lived affair. How fine it would be if only men would feel for virtue the devotion they feel towards beauty. Thank you, that will do, said Diru. I have but one question to put to you. If you understand the words of Confucius so well, why is it that you transgress these very two precepts? I am only an outsider, but without need of explanation from your father I can identify your moral shortcomings. One cannot hope to become a man except by dint of constant self-improvement. You are at present a youth of promise, or as our text has it pure virindus. Whether or not you fulfill this promise depends entirely on your own efforts. Are you to be a man of merit, vir nominis, or are you to be a man no longer esteemed by his fellow men, vir non lam virindus? I shall allow you an initial period of 1 month in which to revise your old texts thoroughly, and a further month in which to study models of octopartite composition. At the end of the 2nd month I intend to set you your maiden theme. If I detect any sign of slackness on your part, you need not expect me to be lenient. As the saying goes, perfection comes through ceaseless effort. Effortless ease brings but perdition. Be sure to bear in mind all that I have said. Yes, sir. And so we must leave Bao Yu for the present, submitting reluctantly to his daily lessons. During his absence at school, Green Delights became unrecognizably quiet, and the days passed slowly and uneventfully. Aroma even found time to do some sewing. One day she sat down to finish a betel nut refresher bag she had been embroidering, and fell to thinking of the great change wrought in all their lives by Bao Yu's new routine. How easy life was for the maids now that he was away all day. If things had only been like this earlier, Skybright might never have come to such a wretched end. Poor Skybright. Aroma sighed, for does not the hare in the trap set the fox's heart a-beating? It was the shortest step from grieving for Skybright to brooding over her own future. What was to become of her? What sort of a life would she lead as Bao Yu's concubine? Bao Yu himself was no problem. She knew how to handle him. But what if he were to marry someone like Mrs. Lien, or Mr. Pan's new wife? Was she fated to be a second Uergia, or Caltrip? To judge from Lady Jia and Lady Wang's attitude in the past, and from the frequent hints dropped by Mrs. Lien, it seemed a foregone conclusion that he would marry Miss Linier. Now there was a complicated young lady. With this new turn of thought Aroma's color deepened, her heart beat faster, and her aim with the needle became more and more erratic. Finally she abandoned her embroidery altogether, and set off for the Naiad's house, determined to put Dayu's disposition towards her to the test. Dayu was reading a book. When she saw Aroma come in, she moved over slightly and nodded to her to sit down. I hope you're feeling quite better, miss, began Aroma, anxious to create the right impression. Not really, replied Dayu. I suppose I do feel a little less weak. What have you been doing at home? Now that Master Bao's at school, replied Aroma, it's very quiet at home, so I thought I'd come round for a chat. Nightingale came in with tea and Aroma rose promptly to her feet. Please sit down, Nightingale dear. She laughed as she continued, you've been making fun of us, so Ripple was telling me the other day. You don't take any notice of what she says, do you? Said Nightingale with a smile. All I meant was that with Master Bao away at school all day, and Miss Chai and Caltrip both living out, things must be dull for you. Aroma seized her opportunity. Caltrip, did I hear you say? Oh, that poor girl. I feel so sorry for her. This new wife of Mr. Pan's is a total eclipse if ever there was one. She's even worse than a certain person. Here Aroma held up 2 fingers, indicating the second young lady of the household Shifeng. This Mrs. Penn doesn't seem to care a bit what people think. That certain person was bad enough, said Dayu. To think that Jia is dead. I know, said Aroma. They were both human beings, after all. It was only their positions that were different. Why did she have to be so malicious? It hasn't done the family name any good. This was the first time Dayu had heard Aroma gossip like this, and she began to suspect what was at the back of it. It's hard to tell, she said. In every family affair, one side or the other has to win. If it's not the east wind, it's the west. A concubine should know her place, said Aroma. She should be too scared to take advantage of the wife. At this point in the conversation, an old woman's voice was heard in the outer courtyard. Is this where Miss Lin lives? Which maid is in charge here? Snowgoose went out to see who it was, and vaguely recognized her as one of Aunt Shue's serving women. What do you want? She asked. I'm here on an errand for Miss Baochai, replied the woman. Something for Miss Linier. Wait here a minute. Snowgoose went in to consult with Dayu, who told her to show the old woman in. Once inside the room, she curtsied to Dayu, then screwed up her eyes and peered at her curiously. Not a word of her errand. Dayu began to feel rather embarrassed and asked what it was that Baochai had sent over. A pot of honeyed lychees is what I've been instructed by Miss Baochai to bring to you, Miss Lin, replied the old woman, her features relaxing into a smile. Then she spotted Aroma in the room. Why, if it isn't Master Bao's maid, Miss Hua. That's right, Nanny dear, replied Aroma. And how did you come to know who I was? Well, looking after Madam's room as we do, we hardly ever go out visiting with Madam and Miss Baochai, so you wouldn't recognize us. But we remember just about all the young ladies that come round our way. She handed the pot to Snowgoose, took another look at Dayu, then turned back to Aroma, and said with a confidential smile. No wonder our madam says that Miss Lin and your Master Bao were made for one another. She really does look just like a fairy. Aroma made a valiant attempt to avert any further blunders. Come along, Nanny, you must be tired. Why don't you sit down and have a cup of tea? Oh no, we're much too busy at home today, the old girl cackled on regardless. We've everything to prepare for Miss Baoqin's giving away. And I've still 2 pots of lychees to deliver to Master Baoyu from Miss Baochai. She took her leave and went waddling busily out of the room. Dayu, who for Baochai's sake had tried to disguise her annoyance at the way the old woman had come barging in, called out after her. Please thank Miss Baochai for her kind present. La-dee-da-dee-da, the old girl could still be heard burbling away to herself. Only Baoyu would have the style to match such a fine lady. Dayu pretended not to hear. Really, said Aroma, trying to laugh the whole thing off, when people reach her age they just talk utter nonsense. You don't know whether to scold or laugh. Snowgoose passed the lychees to Dayu. I couldn't put them away, would you? They chatted a little longer, and then Aroma left. That evening, when Dayu went into her side room to undress for the night, she caught sight of the lychees again. They reminded her of the old woman's visit, and revived the pain she had felt at her tactless gossiping. Dusk was falling, and in the stillness 1,000 gloomy thoughts seemed to close in and oppress her mind. My health is so poor. And time's running out. I know Baoyu loves me more than anyone else. But Granny and Aunt Wang still haven't mentioned it. If only my parents had settled it for us while they were still alive. But suppose they had? What if they had married me to someone else? Who could ever compare with Baoyu? Perhaps I'm better off like this after all. At least I've still some hope. Like the rope on a pulley, her secret hopes and fears spun up and down, tangling themselves tighter and tighter round her heart. Finally, with a sigh and a few tears, she lay down in her clothes, weary and depressed. She became vaguely aware of one of the junior maids coming in and saying, Miss Lin, Mr. Jia Yucun is outside and wants to see you. What could he want, thought Dayu to herself. I'm not a regular student of his. I'm not even a boy. He just happened to coach me when I was a little girl. Anyway, all the times he's come to see Uncle Jing he's never once asked after me, so why should I have to see him now? She told the maid to convey her respects and thank Mr. Yuan for calling, but to say that poor health obliged her to stay in bed. But miss, said the maid, I think he's come to congratulate you, and some people have come to take you to Nanking. As she was speaking, a group including Shi Feng, Lady Xing, Lady Wang and Bao Chai advanced into the room and announced cheerfully. Congratulations, my dear. And bon voyage. What do you mean? Asked Dayu in great confusion. Come on now. It was Shi Feng who replied. You needn't try and pretend you haven't heard the news. Your father's been promoted to grain intendant for Hupa province, and has made a second and highly satisfactory marriage. He doesn't think it right that you should be left here on your own, and has asked Yuan to act as go-between. You're engaged to be married to a relation of your new stepmother's, a widower himself I believe. They've sent some servants to fetch you home. You'll probably be married straight away. It's all your stepmother's idea. In case you're not properly taken care of on the voyage, she has asked your cousin Lian to accompany you. Shi Feng's words made Dayu break out in a cold sweat. She now had a feeling that her father was still alive. She began to panic and said defiantly. It's not true. It's all a trick of Shi Feng's. She saw Lady Xing give Lady Wang a meaningful look. She won't believe us. Come, we are wasting our time. Aunt Wang. Aunt Xing. Don't go. Dayu begged them, fighting back her tears. But she received no reply. They all gave her a curious smile, and then left together. As she stood there and watched them go, panic seized her. She tried to speak, but the only sound that came was a strangled sobbing from the back of her throat. Then she looked about her and saw that somehow she had been transported to Grandmother Jia's apartment. In that same instant she thought to herself, Granny's the only one that can save me now, and fell at the old lady's feet, hugging her by the knees. Save me, Granny, please. I'd rather die than go away with them. That stepmother's not my real mother anyway. I just want to stay here with you. Grandmother Jia's face only registered a cold smile. This has nothing to do with me. But what's to become of me, Granny, she sobbed. Being a man's second wife has its advantages, Grandmother Jia replied. Think of the double dowry you'll have. If I stay, I won't cause you any extra expense, I promise I won't. Oh, please save me. It's no use, said Grandmother Jia. All girls marry and leave home. You're a child and don't understand these things. You can't live here forever, you know. I'll do anything to stay, I'll work for my keep, be a slave, anything. Only please don't let them take me away. This time Grandmother Jia made no reply. Dayu hugged her again and sobbed. Oh, Granny. You've always been so good to me, fussed over me so, how can you treat me like this in my hour of need? Don't you care about me anymore? I may not be one of your real grandchildren, a true Jia like the others, but my mother was your own daughter, your own flesh and blood. For her sake have pity on me. Don't let me be taken away. With these last words she flung herself frantically upon Lady Jia, burying her head in her lap and sobbing violently. Faithful, the old lady commanded, take Miss Dayu to her room to rest. She is wearing me out. There was no mistaking the finality in Grandmother Jia's voice. To Dayu, suicide now seemed the only course. She rose, and as she walked from the room her heart yearned for a mother of her own to turn to. All the affection shown her by grandmother, aunts and cousins alike, had now been exposed for what it was and had been all along, a sham. Suddenly she thought, why haven't I seen Baoyu today? He might still know of a way out. And as the thought entered her mind, she looked up and sure enough, there, standing right in front of her, all laughter and smiles, was Baoyu himself. My warmest congratulations, cuz. This was too much for Dayu. Her last vestige of maidenly reserve vanished. She clutched hold of him and cried out. Now I know how heartless and cruel you really are, Bao Yu. No, you are wrong, he replied. But if you have a husband to go to, then we must go our separate ways. Dayu listened in despair as this, her very last hope, was taken from her. Clinging to him helplessly, she gave a feverish cry. Oh Bao. I've no separate way to go. How could you say such a thing? If you don't want to go, then stay here, he replied calmly. You were originally engaged to me. That's why you came to live here. Has it never occurred to you how specially I've always treated you? Haven't you noticed? Suddenly it all seemed clear. She really was engaged to Bao Yu after all. Of course she was. In an instant her despair changed to joy. My mind is made up once and forever. But you must give me the word. Am I to go? Or am I to stay? I've told you, stay here with me. If you still don't trust me, look at my heart. With these words he took out a small knife and brought it down across his chest. Blood came spurting out. Terrified out of her wits, Dayu tried to staunch the flow with her hand, crying out. How could you? You should have killed me first. Don't worry, said Bao Yu. I'm going to show you my heart. He fumbled about inside the gaping flesh, while Dayu, shaking convulsively, afraid someone might burst in on them at any moment, pressed him to her tightly and wept bitterly. Oh no, said Bao Yu. It's not there anymore. My time has come. His eyes flickered and he fell with a dull thud to the floor. Dayu let out a piercing scream. She heard Nightingale calling her. Miss Lin. Miss Lin. You're having a nightmare. Wake up. Come along now, you must get undressed and go to sleep properly. Dayu turned over in her bed. So it had all been a nightmare. But she could still feel her throat choking, her heart was still pounding, the top of her pillow was drenched in sweat, and a tingly, icy sensation ran down her back and chilled her to the core. Mother and father died long ago. Bao Yu and I have never been engaged, she thought to herself. Whatever could have made me have such a dream? The scenes of her dream passed before her eyes again. She was on her own in the world, she reflected. Supposing Bao Yu really died, what then? The thought was enough to bring back all the pain and confusion. She began to weep, and tiny beads of sweat broke out down the length of her body. Finally she struggled up, took off her outer robe, and told Nightingale to make the bed. She lay down again, and began turning restlessly from side to side, unable to get to sleep. She could hear the gentle sighing of the wind outside her window, or was it the drizzle falling softly on the roof? Once, the sound died away, and she thought she could hear someone calling in the distance. But it was only Nightingale, who had already fallen asleep, and was snoring in a corner of the room. With a great effort, Dayu struggled out of bed, wrapped the quilt around her and sat up. An icy draft from a crack in the casement soon sent her shivering back under the covers again. She was just beginning to doze off when the sparrows struck up their dawn chorus from their nests in the bamboos. First light was gradually beginning to show through the shutters and paper window panes. Dayu was now wide awake again, and started coughing. Nightingale awoke at once. Still awake, miss? Coughing too, it sounds as if you've caught a chill. Why, it's almost light, it'll soon be morning. Please try and stop thinking so much, and rest. You need to sleep. I want to sleep, replied Dayu. But what's the good? I just can't. You go back to sleep anyway. These last words were interrupted by another fit of coughing. Nightingale was already distressed at her mistress's condition, and had no inclination to go back to sleep. When she heard her coughing again, she hurried over to hold up the spittoon. By now it was dawn outside. Haven't you gone to sleep? Asked Dayu. Sleep, replied Nightingale cheerfully. It's already daylight. In that case, could you change the spittoon? Certainly, Mississippi. Leaving the full spittoon on a table in the outer room, Nightingale went promptly to fetch a fresh one, which she placed at the foot of the Kong. Then, closing the door of the inner room carefully behind her, and letting down the flower-patterned portiere, she went out to wake Snow Goose, taking the full spittoon with her. When she came to empty it in the courtyard, and looked closer, she noticed to her horror some specks of blood in the phlegm. Goodness, she blurted out. How awful. What's the matter? Dayu called out at once from inside. Oh, nothing, miss. Nightingale tried her best to cover up her blunder. The spittoon slipped in my hand, and I nearly dropped it. You didn't find anything odd in the phlegm? Oh no, Mississippi. A lump came into Nightingale's throat, and she could say no more. Tears came streaming down her cheeks. Dayu had already noticed a sickly taste in her mouth, and her earlier suspicions were strengthened first by Nightingale's cry of alarm, and now by the unmistakable note of dismay in her voice. Come in, she told Nightingale. It must be cold outside. I'm coming, Mississippi. She sounded more disconsolate than ever. Her tragic snuffly tone set Dayu shivering. The door opened and she walked in, still dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Come along now, said Dayu. Crying so early in the morning? Who's crying, said Nightingale, doing her best to smile. It's so early and my eyes are a bit itchy, that's all. You were awake longer than ever last night, weren't you, miss? I could hear you coughing half the night. I know. The more I wanted to sleep, the wider awake I became. You're not well, Mississippi. I think all this worrying is ruining your health. And good health is like the hill in the proverb. Keep the hill green, keep the hill green. And you'll never lack fuel for winter again. Besides, everyone here cares for you so. Her old ladyship does, her ladyship does, everyone does. How could Nightingale know that the mere mention of these homely names, intended to reassure and comfort, was enough to conjure up again the horror of the nightmare? Dayu felt her heart thumping, everything went black before her eyes, and she seemed on the point of fainting altogether. Nightingale quickly held out the spittoon while Snow Goose patted her lightly on the back. After a long while she coughed up another mouthful of phlegm. In it was a thick wriggling strand of dark red blood. The two maids were pale with fright. They stood supporting her, one on each side, until finally she slumped back, scarcely conscious. Nightingale, aware of the critical nature of her condition, looked at Snow Goose, and made an urgent movement with her lips that clearly meant, go and fetch someone quickly. Snow Goose was no sooner out of the door than she saw Kingfisher and Ebony coming towards the Naiad's house, smiling as they walked along. Isn't Miss Lin up yet? Inquired Kingfisher cheerfully. My mistress and Miss Tanchun are both round at Miss Shichun's discussing her painting of the garden. Snow Goose hushed them both with a quick gesture. What's the matter? They asked in alarm. Snow Goose told them all that had happened, and they shot out their tongues in horror. But that's serious. Why haven't you been to tell her old ladyship? What a terrible thing. How could you be so silly? I was on my way when you two arrived, replied Snow Goose. Who's that talking outside? Called Nightingale from the bedroom. Miss Lin wants to know. The three of them went in together, to find Dayu lying wrapped up in bed. What's all the excitement about? She asked them. Who's been telling you tales? It was Ebony who replied. Miss Tanchun and Miss Xiangyun have just gone over to Miss Shichun's to discuss her landscape of the garden, and they sent us here to ask you to join them, Miss Linear. We're sorry to hear that you're not well. It's nothing serious, said Dayu. I'm just feeling a bit weak, that's all. I'll be up when I've had a little rest. Will you tell Miss Tanchun and Miss Xiangyun that I should like them to come here after lunch, if they're not too busy? I don't suppose Master Bao's been over there, has he? No, miss, came the reply. Master Bao has been going to school the last few days, continued Ebony, and the master tests him every day, so he doesn't get a chance to romp around as he used to. Dai Yu was silent and thoughtful. The two maids stood around for a minute or two longer, and then discreetly withdrew. At the Lotus Pavilion, Shichun's painting of Prospect Garden was being subjected to an aesthetic appraisal by Tanchun and Xiangyun. Too much here, not enough there, a little too thin in one place, too crowded in another. They were thinking of adding a poetry inscription, and had sent to ask for Dai Yu's advice. They were busily talking when Kingfisher and Ebony came back, looking very flustered. Xiangyun was the first to question them. "Why hasn't Miss Lin come with you?" "She had a bad relapse last night, miss," replied Kingfisher, and was up coughing most of the night. According to Snowgoose, the phlegm in her spittoon was flecked with blood. "Are you sure?" asked Tanchun, aghast. "Quite sure," replied Kingfisher. "We've just been in to see her, miss," said Ebony. "She looks dreadful, and hardly has the strength to speak." "If she's as sick as that, she's hardly likely to be able to speak," said Xiangyun bluntly. "What nonsense, Yun. Why, if she couldn't speak, that would mean she was past." Tanchun broke off in mid-sentence. "Dai is a clever soul," said Shichun. "But she does have a tendency to take everything too seriously. If only she could see beyond it all." "We must go and see how she is, anyway," said Tanchun. "If it is serious, we'd better tell Cousin Juan and let Granny know, so they can send for a doctor and find out what to do." Xiangyun agreed, and she and Tanchun set off with a couple of junior maids for the Naiad's house. Shichun said she would follow later. The sight of the girls coming into her room gave Dai Yu a queer feeling, and set her brooding once more over her dream. If Grandmother Jia had proved so cold in the dream, wouldn't Tan and Yun have been even more so? Would they even have bothered to come and see her now, she wondered, if she had not made a point of asking them to? Not allowing these doubts to show, she made a big effort and told Nightingale to prop her up, murmuring to the others to sit down. Tanchun and Xiangyun sat one at each end of the bed, deeply moved by the sight of Dai Yu in this condition. "What do you think is the matter, Dai?" asked Tanchun. "Oh, it's nothing serious. I just feel so drained." Nightingale, who was standing on the other side of Dai Yu, secretly pointed to the spittoon, and Xiangyun, the younger, and by nature less circumspect of the two girls, picked it up and had a look. It was too late. "Is this yours, Dai?" she asked in a voice of horror. "How awful." Earlier Dai Yu had been too faint and overwrought to examine the contents of her spittoon. But now Xiangyun's question reawakened her suspicions. Her heart sank as she turned to look. Tanchun tried to cover up for Xiangyun. "That only means you've got some inflammation on your lungs, and have brought a little up. It's quite common. Yun's so pathetic the way she goes on about the slightest thing." Xiangyun blushed and wished she had never opened her mouth. Tanchun could see how low Dai Yu's spirits were, and how tired she was. She rose to leave. "You must rest and build up your strength. We'll leave you now and call back again later. Thank you both for thinking of me. Mind you look after Miss Lin properly now, Nightingale." "Yes, Miss Tanchun." They were about to leave, when the hushed atmosphere was rudely disturbed by a voice shouting outside. But if you wish to learn whose voice it was, you must turn to the next chapter.